You're listening to Release Your Resistance with Bex Beltran, episode 54. Welcome to Release Your Resistance. This is Bex. The only reason why any of us don't have what we want in life is because of our own resistance. Right now, I'm learning how to recognize and release my resistance, and this podcast tells you how you can release your resistance so that you can live the exact life that you want. Let's get started. When I was mapping out my episodes for the first season of this podcast, I thought it would be a great idea to wrap up the year with a final episode of the first season being a year in review. But as I was thinking about how I would be able to remember everything that happened throughout an entire year, I realized I probably needed some way to check in periodically, to make notes, and have some common touch points so that I would be able to see my own growth and progress, or maybe my own habits and ruts, and notice the things that stood out to me as the months progressed. I decided I would give myself a monthly interview and ask myself the same questions each month so that at the end of the year, I would have a collection of answers to those same questions from different times throughout the year. At first, I thought I was just going to answer these questions on the first day of each month, and then at the end of the year, I would just compare and compile. But as the year progressed, I noticed myself really looking forward to my monthly interview. The routine evolved as the year progressed and as I learned more about when the best time is for me to reflect. I also added a few additional questions partway through. Today, I want to share the questions from this exercise and really encourage you to start a monthly interview with yourself, either with these questions or your own or a combination. Then I want to give you some highlights of what I did and what I learned and realized as I reread all of my answers from the entire year. I can't even remember exactly how I came up with these specific questions for the monthly interview, but it must have been inspired because I really came to love and rely on the questions each month as it came time for me to do the interview. I printed the questions on a half sheet of paper and I kept them in a pocket in my planner. Then on the day of the interview, usually during my beloved morning routine, I would ask myself the questions, and sometimes I had to hold myself back from checking what I had written the month before as I was writing because I wanted the answers to always be completely authentic and not influenced by what had happened last month. But after I finished the interview, I did frequently go back and compare, but I never looked back further than 1 or 2 months. So this past week was especially interesting as I looked at the entire year at once. The questions in the interview are, how's it going right now? What major thing or things happened in the last month? What do you think about those? What lessons have you learned? What have you been listening to lately? What song or other media is important lately? In what ways did you get closer to the life you are creating for yourself? What's not getting you closer? What are you looking forward to next month? Some of the initial things that stood out to me as I reviewed: I love being able to see myself from a distance. As I was reading here now in December of 2020, what I had done and thought about and learned in the early part of the year, knowing now with distance what was in store, but not knowing it at the time, it was like reading a character in a novel, but she's me. It's so interesting to have an outsider's perspective about myself. I can see now, in the present, what I was thinking and feeling then without as much attachment as I had at the time of writing. Seeing yourself without emotional attachment is such a valuable skill. For this reason alone, I'm suggesting that you experiment with something like this just to see if you get the same experience of seeing yourself with distance. As I was reading through all of my answers in chronological order, I thought I could kind of see the starts of some major trends or arcs that happened to me in my own 2020. Again, it was so interesting to read my own writing, knowing how some of those things ended up, but not having known at the time. I was surprised to notice a few common threads throughout most of the interviews. If you would have asked me yesterday how much time I spend on my own continuing education or listening to my own content, I would probably have said, well, sometimes, but not much. The truth is, I mentioned how much I was focusing on my own training in every single interview, and I frequently talked about listening to my own podcast episodes or rewatching my own workshops. I literally learned from myself in 2020. Another common thread that I was surprised to see was how much learning, trying, and experimenting I did this past year. If you would have asked me yesterday how much I focused on learning, trying, and experimenting, I would have probably said, well, here and there. But it was so consistent, month after month. And I don't think I would have realized that if I hadn't kept track and then came back and checked. I would have thought, yeah, I tried some things out, but I wouldn't be giving myself the credit I'm giving myself now, that I can see that month after month, I tried new things, I learned new things, I figured things out, I tried things out. It actually inspires me now as I look back. And my favorite common thread that I would not have guessed was present was how many times I mentioned throughout the entire year how much I love and value coaching, both being coached and coaching others. Just saying it so frequently reconfirms for me that I am in the right place and doing the right thing at this time in my life. It may sound like my 2020 was super amazing, and it was, but I also went through some dips and frustrations and pain. I noticed as I was reviewing my current energy and mood changed as I time traveled through the year again. It was interesting to see that I started out feeling excited, proud, and productive, and as the year progressed, many times my mood on the day of the interview was not great, or grumpy, or slow and unmotivated. I noticed my own resistance coming up for me so profoundly in August, and that resistance has been a persistent passenger throughout the rest of the year. I guess it's a good thing I decided to study and get to know it. I had so many opportunities. But for the most part, despite the craziness of 2020, I am so grateful for my experiences, my lessons, and my growth. Since a lot of year in review lists include books and movies and music, I will tell you about some of those. Then I'll tell you a few ways I found myself getting closer to the life I'm creating for myself in 2020 and how I'm also not. And I'll end with some of the most important lessons I have learned or been reminded of this past year. The music I loved in 2020 included Blinding Lights by The Weeknd. I loved that song so much. It just reminded me of when I was a teenager. I also revisited an actual song from my teenage years, Cosa Más Bella Que Tú by Eros Ramazzotti in 2020. I listened to it in Spanish, since for a while, every time I was in the car or hanging out on my patio, I was listening to 90s Mexican pop. But when I first listened to that song back in the actual 90s, I heard it in Italian. The Spanish version still brought back so many memories, and I wonder if, years from now, I will differentiate the summer of 2020 from the summer of 96 based on what language I hear that song in. One of my musical highlights of 2020 was Taylor Swift's entire Folklore album. I listened to it over and over, and it really reminded me of when I was a teenager and when I would listen to my CDs on repeat. I also think many of her songs have a 90s vibe to them. The movies and TV shows that stood out to me in 2020 were Knives Out. I know it came out last year, but I didn't see it until this year. And I am starting to see a theme here. My husband and I enjoyed quite a few 80s and 90s movies, especially some that he had never even seen before, like, can you believe this? Ferris Bueller's Day Off and The Money Pit. I also really enjoyed the TV show Insatiable and, of course, The Queen's Gambit, and probably a lot more, but they just didn't get mentioned in my monthly wrap-ups. I didn't really start reading fiction again until about the second half of the year, but then I made up for lost time. My favorite novels that I read in 2020 were Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens, Pretty Things by Janelle Brown, Mrs. Everything by Jennifer Weiner, The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, and 28 Summers by Ellen Hildebrand. 2020 definitely got me closer to the life that I am creating for myself. Especially with this podcast. I have made so many wonderful connections because of it, and it's given me a reason to put myself out there and meet new people, even while social distancing and during lockdown. One of my biggest surprises of 2020 was how much I enjoyed and excelled at weight loss coaching. My coaching certification includes a weight loss coaching component, and prior to offering it, because I was going through my applied coaching track, I wasn't really that interested in weight loss coaching, but I ended up really loving helping people manage their weight by managing their minds. I learned so much about why we eat, especially when we're not hungry, and I learned all about managing urges. In 2020, I was also excited to see progress in my first year of business. Looking back now with perspective, I see that I did try so many things and experiment, and I probably floundered. I was frequently frustrated. Maybe it was the immaturity of a less than 1-year-old business, and maybe, hopefully, I'm more settled now. I am excited to see what I do in 2021 now that I have my first year behind me. And part of that includes my pride in myself that I kept going despite the drag I felt in the middle of the year. I described it to myself and to my friends as if I were wading through a swamp. Not fun, but instructional. And now I know if I ever encounter a mental swamp again, which I'm sure I will, I'll just do what I did in 2020. I'll just keep on going. What kept me from getting closer to the life I want for myself? Part of my floundering had to do with not finding my routine or my groove yet. Did I expect to have that figured out within my first year? A crazy, unprecedented, unpredictable year? Yeah, I probably did expect that. And maybe I'm still hoping and working towards finding that timing and balance that will work for me, or maybe I'll never find it. I don't know. Either way, I will keep learning and experimenting. A few other opportunities for learning that came up for me during 2020 were noticing my own hesitation and doubt about myself in business. I also noticed I got away from being willing to feel my feelings and allow my urges, and that really showed up and is still showing up for me with all the dread I have created for myself about renovating and moving to a new house. I expended so much energy resisting this situation, and I think it's led to a dip in my own confidence, and maybe I'll share more on that next year after this is all settled down. What did I look forward to in 2020? Finding that rhythm that I mentioned for my own coaching practice and for this podcast creation. Networking and meeting so many amazing people. Showing up more in my business by hosting meetups and workshops and a Facebook group and producing this podcast. I noticed myself looking forward to finding my own coach. That just underscores my own belief in the value of coaching so much. I also realized how much I looked forward to the cooler weather after the summer so I could start walking in the park as my morning commute, because otherwise I really didn't make time to listen to podcasts and audiobooks as much as I used to. And of course, each month I always looked forward to my monthly interview, and throughout this entire year, I was so curiously looking forward to compiling it all into this review now for you and for myself. Finally, here are the most important lessons I learned or was reminded of in 2020. I'm not going to give the context or descriptive stories about them today. I think they kind of stand on their own, But if you are curious about them and want to hear more details or explanation, please let me know. Maybe it will become its own episode in 2021. So here are 15 lessons learned in 2020. Number 1, anything can be managed with mind management. Your weight, your career, your business growth, relationships, anything. Number 2, people don't pay attention to steps and directions, so keep it simple. Number 3, delaying something to avoid feeling a negative emotion just prolongs and amplifies that negative emotion. Number 4, I can intentionally change my beliefs about myself and about what is possible. Number 5, I can question everything I believe in about myself and what is supposed to happen. Number 6, I can decide to believe and be certain of whatever I want. Number 7, I can do whatever I decide to do. Number 8, inspired action works. Number 9, I am set for life. Number 10, everything can be imperfect and still be fine. Number 11, tasks expand to fill the time you give them. Number 12, I only have a strong reaction to something if I have strong thoughts about it. This is similar to the you spot it, you got it phenomenon. 13, I thought I could plan for and control what would happen. Nope, no control, no certainty. Number 14, I really can watch my thoughts and realize, oh, I'm thinking that, whatever it is I'm thinking. And finally, number 15, I am continuously learning to surrender, to accept reality without resistance. Those are just a few highlights from what I have been up to in 2020, and now I'm curious about where or how our paths were parallel. Did you listen to or watch or read any of the same things? Did you experience any of the same lessons I did? What stood out to you in 2020? What did you resist in 2020? Will you consider a monthly interview for yourself in 2021? I want to hear all about it. Send me an email at hi@bexby.org or leave a comment in the post at bexby.org/by2020. That's BYE2020. I have a few more things to share before I wrap up Season 1 of the Release Your Resistance podcast. I am still going after my goal of 55 reviews on Apple Podcasts by the end of this year. Have you checked out the reviews that have been left so far for inspiration? Here are 2 to motivate you to write one if you haven't yet. Bex changed my thinking. Release Your Resistance is the first podcast I ever listened to, and now none of the others I've tried in the same genre have hit home the same. First off, I love Bex's voice. She has so much authenticity. There's no doubt that she believes in what she's teaching. Secondly, every time I listen to an episode, I find myself going back to the lesson in my mind for days and weeks because the teachings are so true to life. Obviously, I'm a huge fan and highly recommend this podcast to anyone to reevaluate or reorganize their lives and are ready to be blown away. Thank you for making me look at things in a whole new light. It's my pleasure, Val B610. Thank you for that wonderful review. Those are the kind of messages that keep me going. Here's another one. Up to my life. I listened to this podcast while I was hiking alone. It became my companion and gave me a new perspective about my life. The format is fun and easy to listen to. The way she talks is entertaining and simple enough for me to grasp the life-changing subjects. I became addicted and went on more hikes to binge on all the episodes. Oh, ham ram bam. I'm so glad to be your hiking companion. I guess if anyone is going to be addicted to binging on anything, it might as well be a personal development podcast. Thank you so much for listening and for leaving your review. And thank if you've already left me a review on Apple Podcasts. I so appreciate your support and your encouragement. Remember, I want to get to 55 reviews, so if you haven't left one yet and you want to know how, I will leave the instructions for you on the post for this episode at bexb.org/by, BYE 2020. If you're on my email list, you are, of course, one of my favorite people, and I have sent you this list, this monthly interview question list, so we can do this activity in tandem in 2021. And who knows, maybe we'll even compare notes a year from now. I'm taking a short break now that we're at the end of this year, but don't worry, I will be back after the break in the new year. So make sure you are on my email list so you will be notified when season 2 starts. Just go to bexb.org/favorites so that you can get on my email list. Thank you for listening. Thank you for spending every Friday of 2020 with me. I think about you a lot. I am glad that you found this podcast, and I cannot wait to continue our journey together. Enjoy the rest of 2020, and Happy New Year. This has been Release Your Resistance. Thank you for listening. If you like this podcast, make sure you're subscribed and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Also, think about someone who you know who would love this episode and share it with them. There should be a share button on your app if you're listening to this on your phone. If you'd like to continue this conversation one-on-one or in real time, come visit me on my site at bexb.org to see how we can work together.